Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Secrets channel. Tonight we step out into a world so cold that even breathing feels like a chore you forgot to prepare for. You stand on a wide frozen plain under a sky that seems unusually close, glittering with hard sharp stars. The wind slides across the land like it owns everything, including you, and there is no cozy cabin waiting, no heated blanket, no glowing phone screen to scroll yourself sleepy. Just darkness, just cold, and the quiet realization that if you don't handle the next 12 hours correctly, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, maybe share where you're listening from and what your local time is. Somewhere out there, someone else is also drifting towards sleep, hopefully in a warmer situation than yours right now. Now dim the lights, because the sun has already dropped below the Ice Age horizon and you are not ready. You feel the temperature falling the way you might feel an elevator descending. Steady, unavoidable, slightly alarming. During the last Ice Age, which reached its peak roughly 20,000 years ago, vast sheets of ice covered much of North America, Northern Europe and Asia. Even regions far from the glaciers experienced brutally cold conditions, with winter nights plunging well below freezing for long stretches of the year. This is not the dramatic cinematic snowstorm you might imagine. It is worse. It is ordinary cold. The kind that simply exists day after day, wearing everything down. You shift your weight from one foot to the other, already trying to preserve heat without consciously thinking about it. Your body knows the rules even if your mind doesn't. Fingers curl inward, shoulders hunch, breath shortens. Instinct takes over faster than culture ever could. Around you, your group is preparing for nightfall with quiet urgency. There is no dramatic announcement, no one saying, "All right, everyone, time to arrange ourselves in thermodynamically efficient formation." Language as you know, it is still thousands of years away from becoming that precise. But something older than words is guiding everyone. They are gathering close, not in a line, not scattered randomly. They begin to form a loose cluster that will soon tighten like drops of water pulling into a bead. You notice how no one wanders far once the light fades. Even the boldest hunters, those who faced mammoths earlier in the day, now seem uninterested in standing alone. Because daytime danger is honest, you can see it. Nighttime danger is sneaky. Historians know that Upper Paleolithic people lived highly social lives, often travelling in small bands of perhaps 20 to 40 individuals. That number was not just convenient for sharing food, it also turned out to be almost perfect for surviving nights like this. Large enough to generate warmth, small enough to stay coordinated. You don't think of this mathematically, you just feel relieved not to be by yourself. There is, however, a curious little detail researchers sometimes mention with a smile. Some anthropologists have suggested that these close sleeping arrangements may have contributed to humanity's unusually high tolerance for personal space compared to other primates. In other words, your ancestors got very used to having someone's elbow in their ribs. The fire, yes, there is a fire, flickers uncertainly. It helps, but not in the way modern people imagine. Ice Age fires were precious, fragile things. Fuel could be scarce in treeless tundra, and keeping flames alive through wind and snow required constant attention. Fire is a companion, not a solution. If you rely on it alone, you risk waking up as a cautionary tale. So people don't rely on it alone, they rely on each other. You lower yourself onto the ground, which is insulated with layers of grass, reeds and animal hides gathered earlier. The earth beneath still steals heat, but less aggressively now. Others settle beside you, close beside you, much closer than you might normally tolerate. A shoulder presses into yours. Someone's knee rests against your thigh. Another person's back blocks the wind. At first it feels crowded, then slowly it feels warmer. Your body begins to notice something remarkable. Heat that would normally radiate away into the frozen air is being reflected back by the bodies around you. You're not just producing warmth, you're sharing it, recycling it, living inside it. Scientists today call this communal thermoregulation, a fancy phrase for a very simple trick. Many warm bodies lose less heat together than one body does alone. You don't know the term, you just feel your shivering ease slightly like a storm passing. The group continues to compress inward. Without discussion, people adjust positions. There is an unspoken choreography to it, older individuals guided gently towards the middle, younger adults lingering at the edges. No one draws a diagram, no one explains the rules. And yet the shape emerging is not random. It is becoming a circle. Some scholars believe that this arrangement developed purely through instinct and repetition, rather than deliberate planning. Others suggest early humans may have consciously recognized its benefits sooner than we assume. Experts still debate exactly how aware these communities were of the geometry they practiced nightly. But from where you sit, awareness doesn't matter. Survival does. The wind sweeps past, frustrated, now tugging at fur cloaks and loose strands of hair, but it cannot easily penetrate the formation. The cold must work harder. You can almost imagine it prowling around the outer edge looking for a weakness. You tuck your hands beneath your arms. Someone beside you exhales and the warmth of that breath lingers in the shared airspace. It smells faintly of smoke-dried meat and something earthy, completely natural, completely human. Not unpleasant, just real. Above you, the stars remain mercilessly bright. With no artificial light, Ice Age skies were astonishingly clear, the Milky Way a pale river stretching overhead. Beautiful, yes. Also a reminder of how exposed you are. You shift again and the circle subtly adjusts with you. Every movement affects someone else. Every comfort is mutual. This is not independence, this is cooperation at its most physical level. And as the last glow of twilight disappears, you realize something profound. The circle is not just where you sleep, it is how you survive the night at all. The cold presses in, the group presses back, and the long Ice Age darkness truly begins. The darkness does not fall all at once. It seeps in slowly like ink, spreading through water until the edges of the world dissolve, and you are left inside a much smaller universe. This universe is defined by three things only: the faint glow of embers, the sound of breathing, the steady presence of other people pressed close enough that you can feel their warmth through layers of hide. Without the sun, the temperature drops faster now. Ice Age nights could lose heat with startling speed, especially across open steppe, where there were few trees to block the wind. Modern meteorologists describe this as radiative cooling, when warmth escapes upward into the atmosphere after sunset. You do not have that vocabulary, but you notice how the ground stiffens and the air sharpens in what feels like minutes rather than hours. You pull your covering tighter. It is made from stitched animal skins, probably reindeer or bison, scraped and softened with stone tools. Archaeologists have found bone needles dating back at least 40,000 years, clear evidence that tailored clothing already existed. These are not crude drapes tossed over shoulders. They are shaped, adjusted, repaired, and valued. Still, even the best hide struggles against temperatures that can plunge far below freezing. Someone to your left shifts closer, instinctively sealing a gap where cold air had begun to creep in. No one apologizes. There is no concept of personal bubble to invade. In this place, closeness is not awkward. It is necessary. You begin to understand that nighttime here is not simply the absence of day. It is a different environment entirely. During daylight, you travel and gather, speak, plan. At night, your entire existence narrows to conserving heat and staying alive until morning. The tasks are fewer, yet more critical. The fire crackles, then dips lower. Flames are unpredictable companions. In treeless regions, people often relied on scavenged driftwood dried grasses, or even animal dung as fuel. Yes, ancient campfires sometimes burned with a scent that would not be featured in modern home decor catalogues. One experimental archaeologist once recreated such a fire and reported that it burned surprisingly well if you could get past the smell. You might wrinkle your nose, but you would not complain. Complaining wastes breath, and breath is warm. You notice that no one lies with their feet pointing outward randomly. Bodies are angling inward, faces often turned toward the centre. The arrangement is becoming more deliberate as sleep approaches. Not planned in words, but reinforced through repetition over countless nights. Some researchers believe that these sleeping patterns helped reduce exposed surface area, much like penguins huddling together in Antarctic winters today. Humans, of course, are not penguins, though. At this moment, you might feel a certain kinship. Others argue that predator awareness played just as large a role as warmth, since a circular formation allowed those on the outer edge to detect danger quickly. Anthropologists still discuss which factor mattered more, heat conservation or defensive awareness, and the answer may be both at once. A gust of wind slides across the plain carrying faint sounds from far away. You hear something that might be ice cracking, or perhaps an animal moving. Sound travels differently in cold air. It becomes sharper, less forgiving. Even small noises seem magnified. No one fully... He relaxes. Sleep here is not the deep, isolated unconsciousness you might experience in a modern bedroom. It is lighter, layered, shared. You drift in and out, always tethered to the presence of others. When someone stirs, the movement ripples through the group like a signal. You shift again, aligning your back against another person. The contact creates an immediate difference. Heat spreads between you, trapped by fur and skin and the simple physics of proximity. Your body no longer has to fight alone. It is part of a system now. It's easy to forget how vulnerable a single human body is to cold. Without shelter, an unclothed person can succumb to hypothermia in a matter of hours at freezing temperatures. Even clothed survival depends heavily on maintaining core warmth. This is why solitary sleeping would have been extraordinarily dangerous during glacial periods. There is also a quieter benefit emerging. You feel it not just in your muscles, but in your thoughts. Being surrounded reduces fear. Even without language to explain it, your brain settles slightly reassured by the steady rhythm of nearby breathing. Psychologists call this social buffering, the calming effect of companionship during stress. You simply feel less alone beneath the enormous ski. The embers pulse softly, now glowing red rather than gold. Their light reveals outlines instead of details. A hand, a shoulder, the curve of someone's hood. Beyond that small circle of visibility lies total darkness. One curious theory sometimes mentioned in academic circles suggests that communal sleeping may even have influenced early storytelling traditions. With people gathered so tightly, whispers and murmurs would naturally be shared experiences, planting seeds for collective memory. Whether this happened intentionally or not is still uncertain, but the possibility lingers like the last sparks of the fire. You adjust your legs, careful not to open a gap in the formation. Already you are learning the unspoken rules. Stay close, stay aligned. Do not break the circle. Because out there beyond the warmth you're building together, the Ice Age continues its patient, indifferent watch, and the night is only getting colder. You begin to notice that the cold is not just something you feel on your skin, it is something that tries to enter you. It seeps through seams in your clothing, through the soles of your feet, through the small spaces between bodies whenever someone shifts too far away. The Ice Age does not attack dramatically. It persists, patient, methodical. Your body responds in ways that are both automatic and exhausting. Muscles tighten, then release in small bursts of shivering. This is not random trembling. It is your body's emergency furnace. Modern science explains that shivering generates heat through rapid muscle contraction, sometimes increasing heat production by 5 times the resting rate. But it comes at a cost. Energy burns quickly, fatigue follows. You feel that fatigue already? Calories are precious here. Earlier in the day you may have eaten dried meat, marrow, perhaps some gathered roots if the season allowed. Upper Paleolithic diets were rich in protein and fat, especially in colder regions where plant foods were scarce. Those nutrients now become fuel, quite literally keeping you alive, as your metabolism works overtime to maintain a safe internal temperature. Someone beside you exhales slowly, the sound long and steady. You unconsciously match that rhythm. Shared breathing creates a strange harmony, as if the group itself is becoming a single organism. Warm air circulates among you. Moisture from lungs and skin slightly humidifies the enclosed space, making it easier to retain heat. This tiny climate you are building together matters more than you realize. In dry, frigid environments, the body loses warmth faster because cold air pulls moisture away from skin and lungs. By clustering close, you create a pocket where humidity rises just enough to slow that process. It is not comfortable by modern standards, It smells like leather smoke and humanity, but it works. There is an odd detail that experimental researchers discovered while studying cold weather survival. When volunteers were placed in controlled environments, groups that rested in contact required significantly fewer calories to maintain body temperature compared to individuals resting alone. Your ancestors did not run laboratory trials, but over thousands of winters they learned the same lesson through experience. You tuck your chin down, protecting your throat. Exposed areas lose heat fastest. The person in front of you mirrors the motion, almost as if you rehearsed this together. No one gives instructions. Instinct and observation are enough. Historians agree that Ice Age communities depended heavily on cooperative behaviour not just for hunting but for everyday endurance. Survival favoured those who shared resources, knowledge, and warmth. Yet there is a more unusual idea occasionally discussed in anthropology. Some scholars have speculated that habitual group sleeping may have subtly influenced human evolution, encouraging reduced body hair and greater reliance on social structures rather than individual insulation. The hypothesis is debated, but it paints an intriguing picture of warmth coming from companionship instead of fur. The fire gives a soft sigh as part of it collapses inward. A few sparks drift upward and vanish. No one rushes to rebuild it immediately. Fuel must last the entire night. Fires are tended to carefully, often allowed to shrink while bodies take over the role of primary heat source. You shift slightly, feeling the resistance of the circle. There is less empty space now. Everyone has drawn closer as temperatures continue to fall. If someone moves too far, another unconsciously fills the gap. It is like watching water settle into the shape of a bowl. Your feet are tucked beneath another person's legs. At another time in another era, that might seem uncomfortable. Here it feels practical. Extremities are the first parts of the body to cool dangerously. Shared warmth protects them. You realise something quietly astonishing. No one sleeps fully stretched out. Instead, bodies curl inward. Knees bend, arms fold. This posture reduces exposed surface area, conserving energy. Modern mountaineers call a similar position the fetal curl and use it to preserve heat in emergencies. You're doing it naturally, copying what generations before you discovered through necessity. Outside the circle, the land creaks with frost. The sound travels through the ground like distant footsteps, though nothing is there. Ice expanding, soil tightening, the slow mechanics of a frozen world adjusting to night. You listen, but you do not lift your head. Staying still keeps warmth contained. There is still uncertainty among researchers about how consciously early humans understood the physiological dangers of hypothermia. Some argue that repeated exposure alone taught them the warning signs. Others believe knowledge was passed socially through imitation and shared memory rather than explanation. Either way, the practice of clustering together became deeply embedded. Another small movement passes through the group as someone adjusts a covering so it drapes over multiple shoulders instead of one. Shared materials function like shared heat, nothing is wasted. You feel sleep approaching now, but it is not the heavy drop into unconsciousness you might expect. It is lighter, almost like floating just beneath the surface of awareness. Your senses remain half alert to motion, sound, and temperature changes. This is how you rest when the environment cannot be trusted. The circle holds, the warmth builds slowly, and the long negotiation between human bodies and Ice Age cold continues breath by shared breath. You drift near sleep, then rise from it again without fully waking. The rhythm feels unfamiliar compared to the deep, uninterrupted rest you might be used to. Here sleep comes in layers. You borrow it in small portions, never all at once, because your body understands something important. Staying alive requires remaining connected to the group. If you were to roll away now, even by a small distance, the difference in temperature would be immediate. The heat you feel is not coming from the air. It comes from the people around you. Without them, the cold would begin stripping warmth from your body within minutes. Modern survival studies show that a lone person exposed to freezing conditions loses heat dramatically faster than individuals in close contact. Heat radiates outward from the human body in all directions. When another warm body stands in that path, the loss slows. When many bodies form a ring, the effect multiplies. Alone, you're a small fire in the wind. Together, you are a banked hearth. This is why sleeping alone would have been so dangerous in Ice Age environments. Not uncomfortable, not unpleasant, dangerous. You sense someone stirring behind you. They do not get up. They simply adjust, pressing closer, sealing another thin seam where cold air tried to enter. The circle flexes but does not break. Every movement is absorbed and corrected without discussion. Anthropologists often point out that early human groups relied on cooperation to a degree that modern societies rarely require. Hunting large animals, raising children, sharing tools, and enduring harsh climates demanded constant collaboration. Nighttime was no exception. Warmth itself became a shared resource, just like food or shelter. There is also a smaller, more curious detail sometimes noted in ethnographic comparisons. In many traditional societies that still practice communal sleeping, people report feeling genuine anxiety when asked to sleep entirely alone. Some researchers believe this emotional response may echo ancient survival instincts, a faint memory of when isolation at night could mean death. You might call it primitive, but lying here pressed between companions, it feels entirely reasonable. The embers glow faintly just enough to outline the nearest figures. Someone across the circle coughs softly, then settles again. No one reacts with alarm. Sounds like this are expected. They confirm that others are still there. Outside the formation, the cold deepens. Frost begins forming along the edges of hides and on any exposed object. If you were to step away, you would see crystals building silently on the ground. This is how quickly heat vanishes from an unprotected space. You keep your hands tucked in, conserving warmth. The person beside you has done the same. Your forearms touch skin through fur, sharing a narrow band of heat that neither of you could maintain alone. Historians know that Ice Age populations were not large. Estimates suggest that at certain points the total number of humans on Earth may have fallen to only a few million individuals. Communities were scattered and vulnerable. Every person mattered. Losing even one member to cold during the night would weaken the entire group. That reality shapes behaviour more strongly than any spoken rule. There is an ongoing scholarly discussion about whether these nighttime arrangements helped strengthen early human empathy and social bonding. Some argue that repeated physical closeness encouraged emotional cooperation. Others caution that survival necessity does not always translate into affection. The truth likely sits somewhere between. You do not need to love everyone here. You need them, and they need you. A faint sound reaches your ears, not threatening, just the low whistle of wind crossing uneven ground. The circle remains, still conserving energy holding shape. You realise that the formation is not only about warmth, it is about reducing risk in every possible way. If danger approached, those on the outer edge would sense it first. If the temperature dropped further, the group could compress even tighter. The arrangement is flexible, responsive, alive. You shift slightly, careful not to create an opening. Someone's shoulder presses back, automatically reinforcing the boundary. The response is immediate, almost like reflex. This is not an invention of one generation. It is knowledge refined across thousands of winters. Trial error, memory repetition, no written instructions, no formal teaching, just bodies learning what keeps them alive. The fire is nearly gone now, yet you feel warmer than you did hours earlier. Because the fire was never the true centre of the camp. You are. All of you together. The circle breathes slowly in the darkness, holding its fragile pocket of life against the vast frozen world beyond it. And you remain exactly where you must be. Time passes, though you cannot measure it in minutes or hours. There is no clock here, only sensation. The cold shifts. The wind rises, then settles. The breathing around you deepens and softens, then changes again as someone wakes briefly and resettles. Night is not a straight line, it is a slow tide that moves in and out. By now the circle has become firm. What began as a loose gathering is now a deliberate shape held together by habit older than memory. No one announced it, no one instructed you where to lie. Yet everyone understood where they belonged. This is how many Ice Age behaviours likely formed. Long before complex language, humans relied on imitation and repetition. If something worked, it was repeated. If it failed, it disappeared. Over generations, useful actions hardened into tradition without ever being formally explained. Archaeological evidence suggests that structured living spaces existed even in very early camps. At several upper Paleolithic sites, researchers have found hearths positioned centrally with activity areas arranged around them. While these remains do not preserve sleeping bodies, they hint strongly at circular organisation within daily life. The same pattern that governed your waking hours now guides your rest. You feel someone's hand briefly touch your arm as they adjust their position, then withdraw. Not a gesture of comfort, just practical awareness. Maintaining contact helps preserve the shared boundary of warmth. There is an interesting fringe idea that occasionally surfaces in discussions of prehistoric behaviour. Some anthropologists have wondered whether these nightly formations influenced humanity's later fascination with circles in art monuments and gathering spaces. From ancient stone rings to modern campfires, the shape appears again and again. It may be coincidence, or it may echo countless nights exactly like this one. The cold outside sharpens further. You can sense it even without touching it, like pressure against the edges of your shelter. If you extend a hand beyond the shared coverings for more than a moment, the chill bites immediately. You pull it back instinctively. Your body is no longer shivering as much. That is not because the environment has grown kinder, it is because the circle is working. Heat generated by each person now lingers longer within the group than it escapes. The difference may be only a few degrees, but in freezing conditions, a few degrees can decide survival. Modern thermal imaging studies of people resting in close contact show a measurable rise in retained warmth compared to individuals lying separately. You are living inside that principle without ever seeing it. There is still movement though, it is subtle. Someone on the outer edge rotates slightly, presenting their back to the wind. Another person shifts to close the space that creates. The shape adapts continuously like a living wall. Scholars still question how intentional this arrangement was. Did early humans consciously recognize the efficiency of the circle, or did natural clustering simply produce that geometry over time? The debate continues because evidence is indirect. Organic materials vanish and sleeping positions leave few traces, yet the consistency of circular organization across sites suggests something more than accident. You notice that even in half-sleep, people rarely roll away from the group. Muscles seem trained to resist that motion. Years of repetition have taught bodies what minds do not need to say. The fire has faded to a faint red glow, now used sparingly so that fuel will last until morning. Fires in Ice Age regions often required enormous effort to maintain, especially where wood was scarce. Some groups carried embers from place to place, treating them almost like living things that had to be protected. Tonight, the remaining coals serve more as reassurance than heat. You listen again to the layered sounds within the circle. Breathing, fabric shifting, a faint murmur from someone dreaming. These sounds replace the silence outside, creating an auditory shelter as important as the physical one. There is comfort in that repetition. Your thoughts slow. The urgency of the day fades. You no longer think about hunting or travelling. Your world has shrunk to this shared space, this fragile island of warmth held together by human presence. And without needing to discuss it, everyone continues doing the same quiet work, holding the circle. The warmth you feel now is not dramatic. It is not the sudden comfort of stepping indoors on a winter day. It is subtle, built slowly from dozens of small contributions. Each person gives off a little heat. Each person blocks a little wind. Together, those small effects gather into something far more powerful than any one body could create. You shift your shoulder and notice how the space immediately fills again, like packed snow settling after a footprint. The circle resists gaps. Empty air is the enemy here. Scientists today sometimes describe this as collective insulation. In simple terms, your group is acting like a many-layered blanket, except the blanket is alive and constantly adjusting. Unlike woven material, it can respond to movement, tighten when needed, and redistribute warmth where it is most required. This principle explains why even large animal hides alone are not enough. Archaeological discoveries show that Ice Age people used thick furs from species such as mammoth reindeer and cave bear. These materials were excellent insulators, yet they worked best when combined with shared body heat. A hide traps warmth only if there is warmth to trap. The circle supplies that source. A faint draft brushes your back and almost immediately the person behind you shifts closer, closing it off. The reaction is so quick that neither of you fully wakes. Your bodies have learned this cooperation through repetition. There is a curious comparison researchers sometimes make with modern camping experiments. Groups asked to sleep separately in identical cold conditions often report far worse rest and greater fatigue than those allowed to sleep close together. The shared environment reduces not only heat loss, but also stress, lowering the amount of energy the body spends staying alert. Your breathing has synchronized with others again. Warm air moves back and forth, trapped beneath coverings and between shoulders. This shared airspace forms a tiny climate zone, one that exists nowhere else on the frozen plain. Historians recognize that Ice Age survival depended on such cooperation across every aspect of life. Food was shared because hunting success was unpredictable. Tools were shared because materials were scarce. Heat, perhaps the most immediate necessity of all, was shared because it could not be stored or carried. It had to be created fresh each night. There is also an unusual idea proposed by a few evolutionary psychologists. They suggest that habitual physical closeness may have influenced how humans develop trust signals, such as facial expression, recognition, and vocal reassurance. When you spend long hours within arm's reach of others, subtle communication becomes essential. Not everyone agrees with this interpretation, but it raises interesting questions about how environment shapes behaviour. You adjust your legs, pressing your feet against the warmth near the centre of the group. Extremities benefit most from this arrangement. Fingers and toes are especially vulnerable to cold injury because the body restricts blood flow to them in order to protect vital organs. By sharing heat, the circle helps prevent that dangerous withdrawal. Outside, frost thickens. The ground hardens further as moisture freezes. If you were standing alone, you might feel the chill rising through your bones. Here, that upward cold is partially blocked by layers of grass bedding, and by the simple fact that bodies lie so closely together. Scholars still discuss how consciously prehistoric communities understood these physical effects. Some argue that knowledge emerged entirely through observation and habit. Others think early humans must have recognized patterns even without scientific language and intentionally maintained them. The truth may never be known, but the outcome is clear. The practice endured. Someone near the edge of the formation shifts position, turning inward. The outer ring subtly rotates over time, allowing different individuals to face the colder air. This quiet rotation spreads discomfort, evenly preventing any one person from bearing it all night. You do not decide to help, you simply do it when your turn comes. The fire is now little more than glowing fragments, yet the circle holds its temperature. You realize that the group itself has become the primary source of survival. The flames were only ever a supplement. Your eyes close again. Not fully asleep, not fully awake. Suspended in that shared rhythm where individual awareness softens and collective presence takes over. Here warmth is not owned, it is made together. If you could rise above the camp and look down from the night sky, you would see something surprisingly orderly. Not a scattered collection of sleepers, but a shape with logic. The circle is not perfect, yet it is consistent enough to matter. Its form is doing quiet work. Heat moves in predictable ways. It spreads outward from warmer objects toward colder surroundings. A single person lying alone loses warmth in every direction at once, but when several people arrange themselves around a shared centre, much of that outward flow runs into another warm surface instead of escaping into the air. You feel this effect without naming it. The side of your body facing inward remains noticeably warmer than the side facing outward. That difference encourages you to curl slightly, angling yourself toward the shared centre. Everyone else does the same and the formation strengthens. Modern researchers sometimes model this behaviour using simple geometry. A circle encloses the largest area with the smallest perimeter. In other words, it contains more warmth while exposing less surface to the cold. Ice Age people did not draw diagrams in the snow to calculate this. They discovered it through experience night after night, winter after winter. Archaeologists studying ancient dwellings have found circular hut foundations dating back tens of thousands of years in parts of Eurasia. These structures often show central hearths and surrounding activity zones, suggesting that circular organisation extended beyond sleeping into architecture itself. The geometry that kept you alive outdoors may have later influenced how shelters were built. You shift again, pressing closer to maintain contact. The movement is small, but it keeps the interior of the circle dense. Density matters. The more tightly grouped the bodies, the slower the heat dissipates. There is a lesser-known observation made by cold climate researchers. When people share confined warmth, their skin temperatures begin to equalize over time. The warmer individuals lose a little heat. The cooler individuals gain some until a balance forms. It is a natural averaging process. Tonight you are all slowly becoming thermally similar, your differences smoothing out in the shared environment. Some scholars have wondered whether early humans intentionally favoured this shape or whether it simply emerged because every other arrangement failed. The question remains open. Evidence cannot fully reveal intention, and so historians continue to weigh instinct against awareness. A faint noise reaches you from beyond the camp. Perhaps shifting ice, perhaps an animal moving across frozen ground. Those positioned along the outer edge remain slightly more alert. Even in near sleep they listen. The circle is not only about conserving heat, it also creates a perimeter. You notice that those facing outward often keep their backs toward the group, protecting their exposed sides. Their bodies form a kind of living barrier against wind and whatever else might wander close. Inside, the air stays calmer. This layered structure resembles patterns seen in herd animals that huddle for protection during severe weather. Musk oxen, for example, form defensive rings with their strongest members facing outward. Humans are not copying them directly yet. The similarity suggests that certain solutions appear again and again when survival is at stake. Your breathing slows further. The warmth is steady now, less fragile than it was earlier in the evening. It does not feel like luxury. It feels like balance, a narrow margin held carefully between cold and comfort. There is also something psychologically settling about the symmetry. Even without conscious thought ordered, shapes reduce uncertainty. You know where others are. You know where you belong. In a world full of unpredictable dangers, that predictability has value. Historians often emphasize that Ice Age communities depended on shared knowledge, transmitted through observation rather than instruction. Children grew up watching these arrangements, absorbing them as naturally as walking or eating. By adulthood, no explanation was needed. The circle was simply how night was done. You adjust your arm beneath a shared covering, feeling the layered warmth created by fur, skin and breath. Outside, frost continues to thicken, but inside this formation a small stable climate persists. It is a fragile achievement, yet it is enough. The geometry of survival holds firm around you as the long night continues. As the night deepens, you become aware of another pattern within the circle. Not everyone is positioned the same way. Without any spoken instruction, the smallest and most vulnerable members of the group have settled toward the centre. Their presence there is not accidental. You can sense them even with your eyes closed. A child breathing softly, an older individual whose movements are slower and more deliberate. They are surrounded on all sides by stronger adults whose bodies form a buffer against the cold. This arrangement reflects something historians have long recognised about Ice Age societies. Care for dependents was not optional kindness. It was essential for group survival. Evidence from prehistoric skeletons shows individuals who lived with injuries or disabilities that would have required sustained support from others. Such findings suggest communities protected those who could not fully fend for themselves. The centre of the circle offers the most stable warmth. Heat radiates inward from every direction, and exposure to wind is minimal. By placing children and elders there, the group ensures that those least able to regulate their own temperature receive the greatest protection. You feel this structure when someone near you adjusts their posture to block a draft before it can reach inward. The movement is automatic. Shield first, rest second. Anthropologists studying traditional cold climate cultures have observed similar sleeping arrangements even in recent centuries. Families cluster with younger members tucked between adults, maximizing shared warmth. It is not presented as strategy, it is simply what works. There is also an unusual theory sometimes discussed in academic circles. A few researchers have proposed that these protective formations may have strengthened long-term parental investment in human evolution. When offspring survival depended so heavily on group warmth, cooperation in caregiving became deeply ingrained. Not everyone agrees with this interpretation, but it offers an intriguing connection between environment and social behaviour. You shift slightly to relieve pressure in your arm. The adjustment causes a ripple, and another person moves to maintain the barrier around the centre. No one wakes fully. The formation corrects itself in near silence. The fire, now reduced to faint embers, is barely needed. The warmth generated within the circle has become the primary defence. Each breath adds a little more heat to the shared airspace. Each body contributes its portion. Outside temperatures may have fallen drastically by now. During glacial periods, nighttime drops of 20 degrees Celsius or more were not uncommon in open environments. Alone, such a change could overwhelm the human body's ability to maintain its core temperature. Inside the circle, the effect is softened. You notice how coverings are layered across multiple people instead of assigned individually. A single hide stretches over shoulders and backs, functioning like a communal roof. If someone pulls it too far, another gently repositions it without even opening their eyes. Scholars still debate whether these cooperative gestures were consciously taught or learned through imitation during childhood. Either way, they became embedded behaviours repeated generation after generation. There is a sense of quiet priority here. Those at the centre rarely shift outward. Those at the edge accept greater exposure. Strength carries responsibility, though no one describes it that way. You listen again to the steady breathing surrounding you. The sound is different near the middle, softer, more sheltered. The outer ring absorbs the harsher air currents, leaving the interior calm. This layered protection turns the circle into something more than a shape. It becomes a structure made entirely of people. You settle back into stillness, aware that your place helps maintain that structure just as others maintain it for you. In this frozen world, warmth is arranged carefully, human by human, until even the most fragile sleeper can endure the night. You begin to sense that those along the outer edge are not resting quite as deeply as the others. Their sleep is lighter, their movements more frequent. Every so often, one of them shifts position, turns their head or adjusts a shoulder toward the dark beyond the circle. This outer ring serves as another purpose. It is not only holding warmth inside, it is facing outward, acting as a living boundary between the group and whatever might approach through the night. During the Ice Age, humans shared the landscape with formidable predators. Cave lions, hyenas, wolves, and even the occasional saber-toothed cat moved across the same plains. Fossil evidence confirms that these animals hunted many of the same species people relied on. Sometimes they competed directly, sometimes they simply crossed paths. You do not see any of them now, but their possibility is enough. The adults forming this perimeter are often those most physically capable. Hunters, gatherers, individuals accustomed to staying alert for long periods. Even while resting, their bodies remain slightly angled outward, ears tuned to changes in sound. It is not a formal watch. No one announces a shift change. Yet awareness rotates naturally as people stir and settle. Anthropologists describe this kind of shared vigilance as distributed attention. Instead of assigning one guard, responsibility spreads across several individuals, reducing exhaustion while maintaining safety. You experience it as a quiet reassurance that someone is always half awake. There is an interesting comparison sometimes drawn between this behaviour and that of certain herd animals. Bison and horses, for example, often position stronger members at the edges of a resting group with younger individuals clustered inside. The similarity does not mean humans copied them, but it shows how different species arrive at comparable solutions when facing cold and danger. A faint crack echoes from somewhere in the distance. Ice shifting, or perhaps a branch breaking under frost. One of the outer sleepers lifts their head, briefly listens, then relaxes again. The circle remains intact. The temperature continues its slow descent. You feel it most along the side, facing outward, where cold presses harder despite layers of fur. Those on the edge absorb that discomfort so the interior can remain stable. Historians know that cooperation like this extended far beyond nighttime arrangements. Hunting large Ice Age animals required coordinated effort and trust. Archaeological sites reveal tools crafted collectively, and food remains shared among many individuals. The same collaborative instinct now shapes how bodies are arranged in sleep. There is also a lesser-known hypothesis that researchers occasionally discuss. Some suggest that habitual outward-facing positions may have contributed to the development of human spatial awareness and group coordination skills. Others remain cautious about linking such complex traits to sleeping habits alone. The discussion continues with evidence interpreted in different ways. You feel someone behind you adjust their posture, briefly pressing closer before settling again. The warmth they provide flows inward while the chill they face stays mostly outside. No words are exchanged. None are needed. This silent agreement has formed through countless nights. Those who can endure more exposure do so. Those needing greater protection receive it. Roles shift naturally over time, but the pattern remains. The embers give a faint glow, barely illuminating the outlines of figures arranged in this protective ring. Fire once guarded the camp, now people do. You close your eyes, again aware that even in sleep the group is maintaining a kind of watch. Not rigid, not organised by command, just a continuous exchange of awareness. Beyond the circle, the Ice Age landscape stretches vast and indifferent. Within it, this small human formation holds its ground. Warmth inside, cold outside, and along the boundary the quiet guardians of the night. The sounds of the Ice Age night never fully disappear. Even when the wind settles, the world continues to murmur in low, unfamiliar ways. Frozen Allard contracts with soft ticking noises. Snow shifts in slow sighs. Somewhere far away, an animal calls its voice, travelling much farther in the cold air than it would in a warmer climate. You listen without opening your eyes. Here sound matters. In conditions like these, hearing often replaces sight as the first signal of change. Cold air carries vibrations efficiently because it is dense and dry. Modern acoustics confirms that sound can travel farther under such conditions, which means Ice Age nights were filled with noises that seemed closer than they actually were. Your ancestors lived inside that acoustic landscape, learning to distinguish harmless sounds from threatening ones. Someone at the edge of the circle shifts again, responding to a distant noise before settling back down. The motion is brief, practiced. No alarm spreads. The group remains calm. Archaeological evidence shows that many prehistoric camps were established in locations chosen for both shelter and visibility, such as shallow valleys or areas near natural windbreaks. These choices reduced exposure to harsh weather and allowed better awareness of approaching animals. Yet even in carefully selected sites, night brought uncertainty. You feel the reassurance of bodies still pressed around you. The circle is quiet but not silent. Breathing overlaps in a slow rhythm. A sleeve brushes against fur. A faint exhale warms your cheek before fading. There is an unusual observation made by some anthropologists studying communal sleep in traditional societies. They note that groups often develop a shared sensitivity to environmental sounds, reacting collectively even when individuals remain mostly asleep. It is almost as if the group forms a single listening system. Whether this effect existed in deep prehistory is debated, but lying here you can sense how it might happen. The fire is nearly gone now. Only a dull glow remains beneath ash preserved carefully, so it can be revived at dawn. Fire in Ice Age context was rarely allowed to burn freely through the night because fuel was too valuable. Maintaining embers rather than flames conserved resources while still providing a psychological anchor. You realise that the absence of bright light actually sharpens other senses. Your ears pick up the faint rustle of hides as someone breathes deeply. Your skin notices even slight changes in air movement. Outside the circle, the cold continues its steady work. Temperatures during glacial maxima in some inhabited regions likely fell well below -10 degrees Celsius at night. Exposure at those levels could become life-threatening within hours without adequate insulation and shared heat. Historians agree that surviving such climates required a blend of behavioural adaptation and cooperation. Humans did not outgrow the cold by becoming physically thicker or furrier. They adapted socially using organisation and shared space to compensate for biological limits. Another small sound reaches you closer this time. Perhaps just shifting snow carried by wind. The outer sleepers remain calm. No one rises. Experience has taught them which noises demand action and which can be ignored. There is also a curious suggestion sometimes raised in research discussions. Some scholars think that repeated nighttime listening may have influenced early musical perception training humans to detect rhythm and pattern in sound long before formal music existed. Others consider that idea speculative, yet it highlights how environment can shape senses in unexpected ways. You draw a slow breath, feeling warmth gather again beneath shared coverings. The air inside the circle is noticeably softer than the brittle cold beyond it. Each inhalation feels like borrowing comfort created by everyone else. The night stretches onward, filled with distant echoes and quiet adjustments. No grand events occur, no dramatic threats appear. Survival often looks like this, not heroic struggle but steady endurance. Held together by sound, warmth and presence, the circle continues to listen to the frozen world while refusing to yield to it. Even without flames, the memory of fire lingers in the circle. You can smell it in the hides in hair, in the faint ash beneath your hands. Fire has shaped the evening, but now you realize it cannot carry you through the entire night on its own. Earlier, when the flames were stronger, they offered light, a place to warm hands, perhaps to cook or finish small tasks. Yet Ice Age fires were rarely large enough to heat an open camp continuously. Fuel had to be gathered and transported often across landscapes where wood was scarce. In some tundra regions, people relied on shrubs, bones, or dried animal dung to keep embers alive. Archaeologists have uncovered ancient hearths filled with such unconventional materials, confirming that fire was carefully managed rather than freely consumed. Every spark represented effort, every piece of fuel had to justify its use. You shift slightly, feeling warmth that no longer comes from those fading coals, it comes from the circle itself. There is an interesting misconception in modern imagination that early humans simply sat close to roaring bonfires all night. In reality, maintaining a large fire would have been inefficient and sometimes impossible. Instead, people combined modest hearths with shared body heat, creating a layered strategy for survival. You feel this balance now. The embers provide just enough warmth to slow the loss of heat to the ground, while the group supplies the rest. Without either element, the night would be far more difficult. Someone near the edge gently nudges a fragment of wood into the ash, not to build flames, but to preserve a slow burn. The motion is careful, economical. No one wants to waste fuel hours before dawn. Historians widely agree that mastery of controlled fire was one of humanity's most important developments, dating back hundreds of thousands of years. Yet mastery did not mean abundance. Fire remained something to protect, carry and ration, especially during the harshest climatic periods. A lesser-known idea sometimes appears in research discussions. Some scholars propose that the need to maintain embers overnight may have influenced early time awareness, encouraging people to wake periodically and tend the fire, even without formal schedules. Others argue that such patterns would have emerged naturally from fragmented sleep in cold conditions. The exact cause remains uncertain. You notice how the circle subtly supports this task. Those closest to the hearth area are positioned so they can reach it easily, without fully leaving the warmth of the group. A hand extends, adjusts a coal, then returns beneath shared coverings. The formation barely changes. The fire is no longer the centre of attention. It has become part of a system rather than the system itself. Outside, the darkness remains vast and unbroken. Without artificial light, Ice Age nights were profoundly dark once the moon set or clouds gathered. Vision mattered less than touch and proximity. You rely on the steady contact of others to orient yourself. Your shoulder presses gently against another. A shared covering traps the heat rising between you. Breath condenses faintly in the cold air before disappearing into the warmer pocket you've created together. Scholars still debate how prehistoric people balanced reliance on fire versus reliance on social warmth. Some believe communal sleeping intensified in regions where fuel was scarce. Others think it was universal, simply adjusted to local conditions. Evidence varies from site to site, leaving room for interpretation. You listen to the faint crackle beneath the ash. The sound is small but reassuring. Fire is still there, so is everyone else. Your body relaxes further, trusting this combination of ember and companionship. Neither alone would be enough. Together they create something sustainable. The night continues, held not by flame, but by the quiet cooperation of those gathered around it. You adjust the hide pulled across your shoulders and notice how heavy it feels. These coverings are not light blankets. They are thick-layered skins, sometimes stitched together from several animals to create a barrier against wind and frost. Even so, they are not enough by themselves. Clothing during the Ice Age was remarkably advanced for its time. Archaeologists have discovered finely worked bone needles, some dating back more than 30,000 years, which show that people tailored garments to fit the body rather than simply draping hides over themselves. Properly fitted clothing traps warm air more effectively, reducing heat loss during both day and night. Yet despite that ingenuity, these garments could not completely shield a person from extreme cold. The materials were natural and breathable. Wind could still find its way through seams. Moisture from snow or sweat could freeze. A single layer of fur might slow the cold, but it could not defeat it. That is why you remain pressed so closely to others. The circle compensates for the limits of clothing. You feel warmth where bodies meet and coolness where fabric alone faces the air. The difference is unmistakable. Even the best hide becomes far more effective when another person lies beside it, sharing heat beneath the same covering. There is an interesting detail noted by experimental archaeologists who recreate prehistoric garments using traditional methods. They often report that such clothing performs best when worn in layers and combined with shared shelter or proximity to others. Alone in open conditions, even expertly made replicas struggle to maintain comfort. You shift slightly careful not to expose an opening beneath the shared hides. Someone beside you instinctively adjusts as well, overlapping material so that no direct path allows heat to escape. The arrangement resembles overlapping scales, flexible but protective. Historians understand that Ice Age survival required this combination of technology and cooperation. Tools, clothing and fire were essential innovations, yet none functioned fully without social organization. Humans adapted not by relying on a single invention, but by weaving many small solutions together. There is also a curious hypothesis occasionally mentioned in anthropological studies. Some researchers suggest that the complexity of early clothing may have reinforced group identity, since making and maintaining garments required shared skills and knowledge. Others remain cautious about drawing cultural conclusions from limited evidence. Still, it is easy to imagine how such work encouraged cooperation long before written tradition. You notice how the hides covering the centre are thicker, layered more generously over those who need the most protection. The distribution is subtle but intentional. Materials are shared just like warmth. Outside, frost continues to accumulate. If left unattended, exposed skins would stiffen and become less effective. That is another reason they are kept close to bodies where heat prevents freezing and maintains flexibility. The fire remains low, conserving resources, while the circle provides steady insulation. Every element depends on the others. Clothing slows heat loss. Bodies generate warmth. Shared space traps it. Scholars still discuss how much planning went into these nightly arrangements. Some believe they emerge purely through repeated experience. Others argue that such consistent patterns suggest deliberate understanding passed across generations. Without written records, certainty remains elusive. You settle deeper into the layered coverings, feeling the combined effect of material and human presence. Alone, the hides would feel cold at first touch. Here, they are already warmed by those around you. It becomes clear that survival is not hidden in any single tool or object. It lives in the way everything is used together, and so the circle holds wrapped in fur breath and quiet cooperation, while the frozen night carries on beyond its fragile boundary. You notice the air inside the circle feels different from the air beyond it. It is still cold, of course, but softer somehow, less biting. Each breath you take seems easier than the first breaths after sunset. This change comes from something almost invisible: the warmth and moisture produced by dozens of lungs. Every exhale releases heat and water vapor. Alone, that warmth would vanish instantly into the frozen atmosphere. Here, surrounded by others, it lingers. The shared space slowly fills with slightly humid air which holds heat more effectively than the dry cold outside. Modern physiology explains that moist air reduces the rate at which heat escapes from the body, especially through breathing. In extreme cold, dry air can pull warmth from the lungs with every inhale. By sleeping close together, you create a small environment where that loss is reduced. You feel it now as you breathe. The air is not warm, but it is less hostile. Someone nearby exhales deeply and you sense that faint current of warmth before it blends into the shared pocket around you. The circle is not sealed yet. It behaves like a loose chamber shaped entirely by human presence. Researchers studying group survival shelters have observed similar effects. Even without walls clustered, bodies can create a measurable microclimate, raising temperature slightly and increasing humidity enough to matter. That small shift can be the difference between gradual cooling and relative stability. You tuck your face closer to your shoulder, instinctively protecting it from exposure. Others mirror the same posture. The formation tightens as the coldest part of the night approaches. Historians know that Ice Age populations endured long winters in which managing body heat was a daily challenge. Archaeological evidence from seasonal camps suggests people returned to familiar locations that offered predictable shelter. But even the best site could not eliminate the dangers of nighttime cold. There is an unusual idea sometimes explored in academic circles. Some scholars propose that repeated exposure to shared breathing environments may have influenced early human immune responses, gradually shaping resistance to common pathogens. Others argue that evidence for this is too indirect to confirm. The debate continues quietly, much like the breathing that inspired it. You shift your hands beneath the coverings, feeling warmth stored in the materials from hours of contact. Heat builds slowly but also lingers right between layers of hide and skin. Outside the circle, frost thickens into crystalline patterns. The contrast between that brittle landscape and this small pocket of shared air is striking. Here, breath sustains breath. The fire remains a faint presence, but it is no longer necessary to feel secure. The group itself generates enough warmth to hold the interior steady. Scholars still question whether early humans consciously recognized this environmental effect or simply trusted the comfort it provided. Without scientific instruments, they could not measure humidity or temperature changes. Yet they experienced the results night after night, reinforcing behavior through lived success. A sleeper near the edge turns inward, drawing colder air away from the center. The adjustment allows the warmer pocket to remain intact. Movements like this happen constantly unnoticed and unplanned, yet essential. You listen again to the soft rhythm of breathing around you. It is almost like a tide rising and falling in quiet unison. This shared atmosphere is fragile. It exists only because everyone remains close. If the circle broke apart, the warmth would scatter, the moisture vanish, and the cold would rush back in. So you stay where you are, part of this living shelter made not from wood or stone but from body's breath and the simple decision to remain together through the longest hours of the Ice Age night. Sleep comes to you in fragments. You drift into it, then surface again without fully waking, as if your mind is keeping one small window open to the world. This is not restless sleep, it is adaptive sleep. In environments like this, long uninterrupted rest would be risky. The body must remain ready to respond to changes in temperature, sound, or movement within the group. Instead of a single deep phase, your rest cycles gently allowing awareness to return again and again throughout the night. Modern sleep researchers sometimes refer to this pattern as segmented sleep. Historical records from much later periods even describe people naturally waking for short intervals during the night before returning to rest. It is possible that such rhythms reflect an ancient pattern shaped by conditions very much like the ones surrounding you now. You feel someone shift, then settle again. The motion briefly wakes you, but not enough to disturb your calm. This shared environment encourages a kind of collective drifting where individuals rise and fall between sleep and awareness at slightly different times. Historians understand that Ice Age life rarely allowed for the luxury of complete vulnerability. Even during rest, communities remained responsive to their surroundings. This did not mean constant fear, but rather a quiet readiness built into daily rhythm. There is also a curious suggestion sometimes discussed among anthropologists. Some believe that communal sleeping may have encouraged synchronized circadian patterns, helping groups align activity and rest without formal schedules. Others think natural light cycles alone would have been sufficient. The question remains open, resting somewhere between biology and behavior. You adjust your position, carefully maintaining contact with those beside you. Your body has learned to move without breaking the circle. Even half asleep, you avoid creating spaces where cold could enter. The warmth remains steady, rising and falling slightly as people breathe and reposition themselves. Each small change redistributes heat, preventing any single area from cooling too much. Outside, the night continues its slow passage. Stars wheel overhead, though you cannot see them. The frozen ground reflects faint light back into the sky, creating a dim glow across the landscape. In this shared formation, time feels different. Without artificial light or structured schedules, the boundary between waking and sleeping softens. Rest becomes something you visit repeatedly rather than inhabit all at once. Scholars still debate whether such patterns influenced later human sleep habits, or whether they faded as shelter and technology improved. Evidence is difficult to trace since sleep leaves little mark in the archaeological record. Yet the idea persists that ancient nights shaped how humans learned to rest. A sleeper near you exhales deeply, their breathing slowing again into rhythm. Another person stirs on the outer edge, perhaps responding to a sound or a shift in temperature, then relaxes once more. The circle never fully sleeps. It breathes, adjusts, listens, and rests in overlapping turns. You close your eyes again, aware that you are part of that gentle cycle. No alarms, no watches, just bodies sharing warmth and awareness until morning returns. In this way, sleep itself becomes communal, woven into the same network of cooperation that keeps everyone alive through the coldest hours. As the night stretches on, something subtle begins to change inside you. The fear that might have accompanied darkness earlier has faded. You are still aware of the cold beyond the circle, still aware of distant sounds, yet they feel less threatening now. Surrounded by others, your mind settles into a quieter state. This is not just physical survival, it is psychological shelter. Humans are deeply social creatures, and even in prehistory, emotional regulation likely depended on proximity to others. Anthropologists studying modern foraging societies often observe that group sleeping reduces anxiety, especially among children who remain calmer when they can sense familiar people nearby. You feel that effect now. The steady breathing, the shared warmth, the occasional shift of a shoulder all signal that the group endures. Each small sensation reassures your mind that you are not facing the night alone. There is scientific evidence suggesting that close social contact can lower stress hormones and stabilize heart rate. While Ice Age people did not measure cortisol levels, their bodies would have responded just the same, easing tension in the presence of trusted companions. You draw a slow breath and it comes easier than it did hours ago. Historians widely agree that cooperation was essential to human expansion into harsh environments. Unlike many animals equipped with thick fur or specialized physiology, humans relied heavily on social organization to manage threats. Emotional resilience reinforced through group presence may have been just as important as tools or clothing. There is also an intriguing idea occasionally raised in research discussions. Some scholars wonder whether the habit of sleeping together helped shape early empathy, encouraging individuals to remain attuned to the comfort and distress of others. Critics argue that survival pressure alone could explain such attentiveness. The question remains open, part of the broader mystery of how environment influences human behaviour. You shift slightly, careful not to disturb the balance of coverings and contact. Someone nearby adjusts in response, maintaining the continuity of warmth without either of you fully waking. The circle feels steady now, almost timeless. The cold continues outside, yet inside there is a fragile equilibrium built entirely from shared presence. This emotional calm is not separate from survival. A body that can relax conserves energy more efficiently. Muscles loosen, breathing steadies. Less heat is lost through tension or unnecessary movement. The outer sleepers still respond occasionally to distant sounds, but even they seem less rigid now. Familiarity with the night reduces alarm. Experience teaches which dangers are real and which are simply part of the frozen landscape. Scholars still debate how much emotional life we can infer from archaeological remains, since feelings do not fossilize. Yet the structures of cooperation found in ancient sites strongly suggest that early humans depended on bonds extending beyond mere practicality. You rest more deeply for a time, supported not just by bodies, but by a sense of belonging that needs no explanation. Here warmth and reassurance are intertwined, one reinforces the other, and so the circle holds not only against the cold of the Ice Age, but against the loneliness that such a vast and silent world might otherwise bring. If you could see beneath the ground where you lie, you might one day find faint traces of this night. Not clear impressions of bodies, but subtle signs left behind by repetition. Over many seasons, the same spaces are used again and again, compressing soil, scattering fragments, leaving patterns that archaeologists will later puzzle over. Excavations at several Upper Paleolithic sites have revealed circular arrangements of debris, hearth remains, and tool fragments that suggest organized living spaces. While soft materials like hides and bedding rarely survive the distribution through objects, hints that people gathered worked, and likely rested in ring-like formations around central points. You shift slightly, feeling the ground firm beneath layers of grass and skins. These materials were deliberately laid down earlier, creating insulation from the frozen earth. Without that barrier, the body would lose heat rapidly through conduction. Modern studies confirm that direct contact with cold ground can drain warmth faster than exposure to cold air alone. Even a thin layer of plant material can significantly reduce that loss. Your ancestors understood this through experience selecting bedding carefully each evening. Someone near you adjusts the layer beneath their shoulder, redistributing the material so that no one lies directly on exposed soil. The movement is small but purposeful part of the quiet maintenance that keeps the circle effective. Historians rely on clues like these to reconstruct prehistoric behaviour. They analyse soil discoloration, pollen traces and artefact placement to understand how ancient camps were organised. The evidence rarely tells a complete story, yet repeated circular layouts appear often enough to suggest a meaningful pattern. There is also an unusual interpretation proposed by a few researchers. Some suggest that the repeated use of circular camp spaces may have influenced early spatial memory, encouraging humans to think of shared areas as communal centres. Others argue that such conclusions reach beyond what the data can support. The discussion continues, shaped by fragments of evidence and careful imagination. You listen again to the steady breathing around you. Even without seeing it, you know the circle remains intact. Each person occupies a familiar place maintained not by markers but by habit. The embers have dimmed further, yet their earlier presence lingers in warmed ground near the centre. That residual heat adds to the insulation, another small advantage layered into the arrangement. Archaeologists often emphasise that prehistoric camps were not random scatterings of activity. They show signs of planning, repeated use and shared understanding of space. The same instincts that guided tool-making and hunting likely influenced how people arrange themselves at night. Scholars still debate whether such organisation should be called deliberate design or simply learned behaviour reinforced over generations. Without written explanation, intention must be inferred from pattern alone. You settle again into stillness, aware that this place has likely held many nights like this one. Others lay here before you. Others will lie here again. The ground itself remembers through compression and trace. In the darkness, the circle continues its quiet work, leaving behind only the faintest evidence of how humans once endured the cold together. You might imagine that such a careful arrangement must have been invented at some specific moment, perhaps by an especially observant ancestor who noticed that people slept warmer when gathered this way. Yet the truth is far less clear. No record tells us when humans first began forming these nighttime circles. There is no single site that announces the beginning of the practice. Instead, the behaviour appears gradually inferred from patterns spread across vast stretches of time and geography. Historians generally agree that many survival strategies in prehistory did not emerge as deliberate inventions but as accumulated habits. One generation repeats what worked for the previous one, often without knowing why. Over centuries, those habits become traditions so deeply embedded that they feel natural. You feel that sense of inevitability now. No one tonight is explaining the arrangement. No one debates whether to lie closer or farther apart. The circle forms because it always has. There is an ongoing scholarly conversation about whether early humans consciously understood the benefits of this formation or simply followed instinct reinforced by experience. Some researchers argue that repeated observation would have made the advantages obvious even without formal reasoning. Others suggest that natural clustering in response to cold may have shaped the pattern without conscious design. The discussion remains unresolved. A small adjustment ripples through the group as someone rolls slightly inward, tightening the shape. The change happens without comment, yet everyone responds by settling into a more compact arrangement. This kind of silent coordination appears in many aspects of prehistoric life. Archaeological findings show consistent tool styles within regions, suggesting knowledge passed through demonstration rather than instruction. The same process may have governed nightly survival behaviours. There is also a more speculative idea that sometimes surfaces in anthropological writing. A few scholars have proposed that such shared habits contributed to the early formation of culture itself, meaning repeated behaviours that carried meaning simply because they were done together. Others caution against assigning symbolic weight to actions that may have been purely practical. You listen to the breathing around you and realise that intention may not matter as much as continuity. Whether discovered by insight or shaped by necessity, the circle persists because it works. Outside, the frozen landscape remains unchanged, indifferent to human patterns. Yet within this small formation, knowledge is carried not in words but in repetition. Generations before you endured nights like this. Generations after will do the same, adapting, slightly adjusting to new climates or materials, yet preserving the essential idea of shared warmth. Scholars still search for clearer answers in the archaeological record, but some aspects of early life resist precise explanation. Behaviour leaves softer traces than stone tools or bones. It must be reconstructed through careful comparison and educated inference. You shift your hand beneath the covering feeling, another hand nearby, equally still, equally warm. That simple contact represents countless earlier nights of learning, trial and survival. The circle continues without needing to know its own history, and perhaps that's why it endured so well. If you could step away from this human circle for a moment and look across the Ice Age landscape, you might notice that you are not the only creature using togetherness to survive the cold. Many animals nearby rely on similar strategies, though they do so in their own ways. Herd animals such as musk oxen gather tightly during severe weather, forming dense groups that reduce heat loss and shield weaker members from wind. Fossil and ecological evidence shows that these animals thrived in the same frigid regions humans inhabited. Their survival depended on cooperation as much as strength. You remain within your own version of that principle, though, shaped by human flexibility rather than instinct alone. Unlike herd animals bound to fixed behaviour, people adapt their arrangement each night, adjusting to terrain, weather and group size. Researchers studying comparative behaviour often describe this as convergent adaptation, where unrelated species develop similar solutions because they face similar environmental pressures. Humans did not learn the circle by watching musk oxen, yet both arrived at forms of collective shelter. You feel the result in the steady warmth surrounding you. The outer sleepers absorb the worst of the wind, the inner sleepers rest in calmer air. The structure mirrors patterns seen throughout the natural world. Historians note that Ice Age ecosystems were complex networks of interaction. Humans were not separate from this system, but part of it, observing animal movements following migration routes and learning indirectly from the rhythms of other species. There is an unusual theory occasionally mentioned in anthropological discussions. Some scholars suggest that observing animal group behaviour may have subtly reinforced human cooperation, even if unconsciously. Others argue there is little evidence for such influence and that human social organisation developed independently. The idea remains speculative yet intriguing. A faint gust passes over the camp, carrying scents of snow and distant life. The circle tightens slightly in response, bodies leaning closer together, as if sharing an unspoken signal. You realise that this arrangement is not unique to one place or time. Variations of it likely occurred across continents wherever humans faced prolonged cold. Each group adapted the same basic principle to its own environment. Archaeological findings from Eurasia and North America reveal repeated signs of clustered habitation areas during glacial periods, suggesting that communal strategies were widespread. While the exact details differed, the reliance on shared warmth appears to have been nearly universal among cold climate populations. You adjust your position, aware that your own comfort depends on the same cooperation seen throughout the surrounding ecosystem. In this frozen world, survival rarely belongs to the isolated individual. It belongs to those who gather a line and endure together. The circle continues one small example of a much larger pattern written across the Ice Age landscape. As the night moves toward its deepest hours, the circle begins to feel almost ceremonial, though no one would describe it that way. What started as a practical arrangement now carries a rhythm and familiarity that borders on tradition. The same positions are taken, the same adjustments are made. Night after night, the pattern repeats. Humans are remarkably good at turning repeated actions into shared meaning. Even without formal language, consistent behaviours can become anchors of identity. The circle is where warmth is found, where stories may have been whispered before sleep, where reassurance is exchanged without words. Archaeologists have uncovered prehistoric sites where objects appear deliberately arranged around central hearths, sometimes including decorative items such as carved bones or shaped stones. While these finds do not prove ritual in the modern sense, they suggest that central gathering spaces held importance beyond pure utility. You feel that quiet significance now. The place where you lie is not random ground, it is familiar, chosen and returned to. Over time, such repetition shapes one's memory. There is a lesser-known hypothesis occasionally discussed among researchers. Some propose that these nightly gatherings may have contributed to the earliest forms of symbolic thinking, simply because people experience shared space so consistently. Others caution that symbolism cannot be assumed without clearer evidence. The question remains open, resting between archaeology and interpretation. You notice how even in near sleep individuals maintain awareness of the circle's structure. A covering slips and someone corrects it. A space opens and another body shifts to fill it. The pattern is maintained almost instinctively. Historians recognize that Ice Age communities relied on continuity to manage uncertainty. Familiar arrangements reduced rework. Returning to known formations meant fewer mistakes in dangerous conditions. Outside the frozen plain remains silent and immense, yet inside this formation there is order. The group creates its own small world, repeating gestures learned across generations. You rest within that continuity part of something older than memory, held together by habit as much as necessity. The circle persists not only because it works, but because it has always worked. As the hours pass, the cold does not remain constant. Ice Age nights were rarely uniform. Temperatures could shift depending on cloud cover, wind direction, and the subtle movement of air across open ground. Your circle responds to these changes without anyone needing to announce them. When the wind strengthens, the outer edge tightens. Bodies angle slightly to block it. When the air stills, the formation relaxes just enough to remain comfortable without losing shared warmth. This flexibility allows the group to adapt to conditions that might otherwise drain precious energy. Paleoclimatologists studying glacial environments have reconstructed these nightly fluctuations using ice cores and sediment data, revealing how quickly surface temperatures could change. Such findings help explain why survival required constant adjustment rather than a single fixed strategy. You feel one of those shifts now? A cooler current slips across the ground and several people instinctively move closer. The response is smooth practice through repetition. There is an interesting observation made by researchers examining traditional nomadic groups in cold regions. They note that sleeping arrangements often change slightly, depending on season, terrain, and available materials. No single configuration dominates. Adaptability itself becomes the tradition. Historians believe Ice Age communities operated in much the same way, altering camp layouts during migrations or seasonal returns to familiar areas. The circle remained a foundation, but its size and density could expand or contract as needed. A more speculative idea occasionally appears in academic discussion. Some scholars suggest that this constant adjustment may have strengthened human problem-solving abilities, encouraging flexible thinking rather than rigid patterns. Others argue that such conclusions are difficult to verify from archaeological evidence alone. You shift your legs, noticing that the bedding beneath has been redistributed again thicker, where the ground feels colder. Someone must have adjusted it while half asleep. Even unconscious, the group continues maintaining its shared environment. The embers remain faint but alive, waiting for morning attention. Their presence reminds you that this night is part of a longer cycle. Dawn will come, the circle will loosen, movement will return. For now, though, adaptation continues quietly, breath by breath, posture by posture, keeping the fragile balance between human warmth and Ice Age cold. Even within this shared effort, small negotiations take place. They are not spoken aloud, yet they shape how the circle holds together. A shoulder presses closer here, someone shifts slightly outward there. Space, warmth and comfort are quietly balanced among everyone present. Human cooperation has never meant perfect harmony. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric communities shows signs of injury, healed fractures, and even occasional conflict. Life was demanding, and people carried different strengths, needs, and temperaments into the group. You sense that complexity even now. Some sleepers remain very still, conserving energy. Others move more often, adjusting coverings or posture. The circle absorbs these differences, redistributing warmth as needed. Anthropologists studying communal living arrangements have observed that shared sleeping spaces often require subtle social awareness. Individuals learn how to position themselves without disturbing others, maintaining both proximity and stability. These habits can form without formal teaching, guided by repetition and necessity. There is also an intriguing idea raised by a few researchers who study early social structures. They suggest that managing shared nighttime space may have contributed to the development of fairness concepts, since resources like warmth and protection had to be distributed collectively. Critics caution that such interpretations risk projecting modern ideas onto ancient contexts. The truth likely lies somewhere between instinct and emerging social norms. You adjust your arm and feel another person make room without waking fully. The exchange is silent but cooperative. Historians widely agree that Ice Age survival depended on this kind of flexible collaboration. No single individual could manage every challenge alone. Hunting, shelter building, tool making, and enduring the cold all required shared effort. Outside, the darkness begins to feel less absolute, though dawn is still far away. The circle remains intact, quietly negotiating comfort and responsibility among its members. In this way, even rest becomes a form of cooperation shaped by the same social instincts that guide waking life. Somewhere in the slow passage of the night, you notice that not everyone is asleep at once. A person near the outer edge opens their eyes, briefly looks into the darkness, then closes them again. Later, someone else shifts, lifting their head as if listening before settling back down. This pattern happens naturally without coordination. Human sleep cycles vary slightly from person to person, and in a group setting, those differences create a quiet rotation of wakefulness. At any given moment, someone is closer to alertness than the others. Modern sleep science confirms that people do not all move through sleep stages in perfect synchronization. Variations in timing can produce what researchers call staggered vigilance, where a group maintains partial awareness without planning it. In Ice Age conditions, this accidental overlap would have been extremely useful. You feel reassured knowing that even while you drift, someone nearby is likely awake enough to notice changes in sound or temperature. Historians studying early human societies often emphasize that survival strategies were not always deliberate inventions. Many emerge from biological rhythms interacting with environmental pressures. The circle at night benefits from this natural staggering of sleep, creating a kind of informal watch system. There is a speculative idea sometimes discussed among anthropologists. A few suggest that these overlapping sleep cycles may have influenced later cultural practices, such as shared night watches or communal storytelling during wakeful intervals. Others remain cautious, noting that direct evidence is difficult to trace. You shift slightly, aware that another person has just settled after a brief waking moment. Their warmth remains their presence, continuing to reinforce the formation. Outside, the cold persists, but inside the circle there is continuity. Awareness passes quietly from one sleeper to another, like a relay never announced, never planned. The group endures not because everyone is awake and not because everyone is asleep, but because they exist somewhere in between, sustaining one another through alternating moments of rest and attention. Gradually the long night begins to ease, though dawn is still only a promise below the horizon. The cold remains, yet there is a subtle shift in the atmosphere, a sense that the darkest stretch has passed. The circle loosens slightly as bodies relax, after holding their positions for hours. You feel stiffness in your limbs, the natural result of remaining curled and close for so long. Others begin to move as well, not rising yet, but stretching within the shared space. The formation adjusts, allowing a little more room, while still preserving warmth. Historians believe that repeated experiences like this influenced how later human shelters were organised. Early huts and tents often featured central hearths surrounded by sleeping areas, echoing the same arrangement used in open camps. The architectural circle may have grown directly from these nightly gatherings. Archaeological discoveries from sites dating to the end of the last Ice Age show increasingly structured dwellings built with bones, wood and hides arranged in rounded shapes. These shelters did not appear suddenly. They evolved from habits already practiced in the open landscape. There is an intriguing suggestion raised by some researchers that the familiarity of circular sleeping may have made such designs feel naturally comfortable, encouraging their adoption even when new building materials became available. Others argue practical engineering alone explains the shape. As with many prehistoric questions, certainty remains elusive. You notice someone near the embers, gently stirring them, preparing for the return of flame when daylight allows fuel gathering. The action signals transition. Night is ending. Activity will soon resume. The circle which served as protection through darkness now begins transforming back into a group ready to move, hunt and travel. Its purpose shifts with the light, yet its influence lingers. Even as you stretch, you remain aware of how instinctively you sought closeness during the coldest hours. That habit will return again tonight, and the night after that, shaping routines that eventually become traditions carried into settled life. Scholars often point to such repeated behaviours as foundations of later social organisation. Long before permanent villages, people practiced forms of spatial cooperation that would later guide how communities were built. You take another slow breath, feeling the shared warmth beginning to dissipate as individuals prepare to separate. The circle is dissolving but not disappearing. It exists as a pattern ready to form again whenever darkness demands it. A faint greyness begins to gather along the horizon, almost too subtle to notice at first. The stars lose a little of their sharpness. The frozen world is still cold, still quiet, yet something is changing. Morning is approaching. As light slowly returns, the circle relaxes further. People begin to uncurl, stretching stiff arms and legs, careful not to disturb others too abruptly. The shared coverings are adjusted, then gradually pulled back. What held everyone tightly together through the night now loosens with the promise of daylight. This daily transformation was likely repeated for thousands of years during the Ice Age. Night demanded closeness. Day allowed dispersion. Historians see this rhythm as one of the earliest examples of humans structuring their lives around environmental cycles rather than fixed schedules. Archaeological studies of ancient camps show evidence of these repeated patterns. Hearths were rekindled each morning. Tools were redistributed. Activity areas spread outward again after being compressed overnight. The physical traces suggest a constant expansion and contraction of communal space. There is a thoughtful idea sometimes explored by anthropologists. Some propose that this repeated gathering and separating may have influenced later social customs such as shared meals, evening gatherings, or even the modern instinct to sit in circles during conversation. Others caution that such connections are difficult to prove directly. Still, the resemblance is hard to ignore. You sit up slightly, feeling how quickly warmth begins to fade once bodies move apart. The cold reminds you that the circle was never just habit, it was protection. Nearby, someone breathes life into the embers, coaxing a small flame that flickers weakly before growing. Fire will take over again during the day when fuel can be found and tended more easily. Scholars still discuss how these ancient routines shape the transition from nomadic life to more settled communities. The need to gather for warmth may have reinforced the value of shared space, eventually influencing how permanent dwellings were arranged. You glance around at the others, now waking fully, each person stepping back into individuality after a night spent functioning almost as a single organism. Yet even as the circle dissolves, its imprint remains in memory and practice. Because when darkness falls again, the shape will return. The light grows, slowly spreading across the frozen ground in pale shades of silver and blue. Morning does not bring warmth immediately, but it brings visibility, and with it a quiet sense of release. The circle that carried everyone through the night has opened. People rise, stretch, and begin to prepare for another day in the Ice Age world. You feel the lingering heat where bodies had been close already fading into the chill air. It is a reminder of how temporary that shared shelter was, and how necessary it will be again when evening returns. Historians see in these nightly gatherings one of humanity's earliest forms of architecture, built not from wood or stone but from cooperation itself. Long before permanent homes, humans created living structures out of presence, positioning themselves in ways that turned vulnerability into resilience. There is also a small but fascinating idea sometimes discussed among researchers. A few suggest that our modern comfort with gathering in circles around tables, fires, or living rooms may echo these ancient formations. Others argue that such parallels are symbolic rather than direct inheritance. Like so much of prehistory, the connection invites reflection more than certainty. You watch as the last traces of the night's arrangement disappear into ordinary activity, yet the knowledge remains embedded in habit. When darkness falls again, no one will need to decide what to do. They will simply gather as people have done for tens of thousands of years. Scholars continue to examine archaeological remains, climate records, and comparative studies, still asking how much of this behaviour was instinct, how much was learned, and how much shaped what we later became. The answers are incomplete, but the pattern itself is unmistakable. You carry the memory of warmth of breath shared in cold air, of quiet endurance sustained together. And now as the day begins, the story softens. The wind moves more gently across the plain. The urgency of the night fades into distance. You can almost imagine the circle still there, not in sight but in feeling, like the echo of a fire long after its flames have gone. So you let the image settle, a group of people resting close beneath a vast sky, breathing slowly, keeping one another warm, waiting for morning. Let your thoughts drift the way that ancient night drifted into day. There is no need to hurry, the cold is gone now, the effort is finished. You can rest without holding shape or guarding warmth. Just breathe steady and calm, as if you are still within that quiet circle, surrounded by presence, carried gently towards sleep. Sweet dreams.